I've called this Canada, Two National Bibliographic Agencies, Two Approaches. And so first I have to start off by explaining why Canada does have two national bibliographic agencies and therefore two national bibliographies. Then I'll explain a little bit about the availability of these two bibliographies, our cataloging levels and priorities, and about the integration of digital materials. And now I have to give you a little warning, because of course I know more about BA&Q, or the Library and Archives of Quebec, than I do about Library and Archives Canada. Of course, because I work at Bibliothèque Archives Nationales du Québec. For Library and Archives Canada, I've used public web information and also information I've had over the years from personal discussions with my colleagues at the national level. Now, Canada has, of course, is a federation of 10 provinces and 3 territories, and has 2 official languages at the national level, English and French. But when you come to the provincial level, all the provinces except Quebec have English as their official language. Quebec has French as its official language. And actually, I should mention that one of the provinces, New Brunswick, has 2 official languages. And so this linguistic fact is part of the reason why we have 2 national bibliographic agencies and therefore 2 bibliographies. So at the national level, there's Library and Archives Canada, which was formed in 2004 as a merger of the National Library of Canada and the Public Archives of Canada. Public Archives is quite an old institution from 1872, and the National Library from 1953. In the province of Quebec, the Bibliothèque Nationale du Québec, or the Quebec National Library, was founded in 1967, and in 2002 merged with a project called the Grande Bibliothèque, which was a project to have a large central public library, which had been started in 1998. And in fact, that library was finished and open to the public in 2005, so after the merger with the National Library. And then the newly augmented National Library in 2006, following suit with the federal level, merged with the National Archives of Quebec, which had been founded in 1920. So then, the service mandates of the 2 institutions are different. LAC serves Canada at a federal level, and of course offers bilingual services in English and French, including having a bilingual cataloging policy, which means basically that English language resources are cataloged in English with English subject headings, and French language resources are cataloged in French with French language subject headings, and bilingual resources are cataloged in both languages and have subject headings in both languages. Their legal deposit legislation at the federal level covers all Canadian publications, including those published in Quebec. In the province of Quebec, BA&Q serves the province of Quebec, and our service mandate, because of our language, is to provide a French language catalog, so we provide only French language subject headings, and everything else is done in, with regard to a French language catalog. There is an additional legal deposit requirement for Quebec public publishers, which is to deposit 2 more copies of their publications at BA&Q, and this covers all Quebec publications, regardless of their language. So we do have quite a varied collection because, in fact, in Canada, there's a large number of publications that are in neither English nor French, but are in the languages of all the different communities who have come to settle in Canada over the last few centuries. So then we have 2 national bibliographies. Canadiana, which was published by the National Library of Canada starting in 1951 and is now part of LAC, was published in print as a traditional print bibliography with monthly and annual updates up until 1991. Then switched to a microfiche format until 2000, and an annual CD-ROM until 2007, and now is distributed entirely online, and there's a MARC Records distribution service, which actually started earlier. The Bibliography du Québec, or the Quebec Bibliography, was started in 1968 by the new National Library of Quebec in print until 2002, and went in then to HTML starting in 2003, which is the form we have now. And here I have a small snapshot of the look of this bibliography, and you can see that it's, while you can't read the specific records, you can see that these two records are formatted with ISBD conventions, with their subject headings, and class numbers at the bottom of each record, Dewey class numbers, LC class number. So it's formatted as a very traditional bibliography with indexes by subjects, by authors' titles, and by publishers. Clicking in the wrong place. Okay, so then in addition to being published in the actual bibliographies, of course, the records are distributed as MARC records in different ways. And so the Canadiana records are mainly available through Amicus, which is the National Union Catalogue run by Library and Archives Canada. And it's free, and you'll see in the start page that it says that it's free, and this is because there was a time when it was not free, and so this was a big deal in 2004 when the then National Librarian, Roch Carrier, decided that it would be free and managed to persuade the politicians that it should be so. And of course, it's updated as Library and Archives Canada catalogs, and there's a Z3950 service. In addition, the MARC records distribution files are offered, and so they're in three streams. The monographs, which are weekly, and they include descriptions for all monographic items, including books, videos, CD-ROMs, and ebooks, anything that's cataloged by LAC of those material types, and so they're all together. Then the music and sound recordings are issued monthly in a separate file, and authorities every second week. And these are distributed to WorldCat, AG Canada, which is a Canadian bibliographic utility, and the authorities to VIAF. And of course also can be purchased. The FTP files are not free. They can be purchased and loaded by any Canadian library or any library anywhere that wants to do so. So here's the basic screen for the Amicus, and you can see that there's limiting by material type is possible, as well as various other limits. Now, BA&Q's records, of course, we make them available through our online catalog. Now, the IRIS online catalog is not just the heritage materials, but also, of course, the materials that come from this Grande Bibliothèque, which is a general public library, a kind of public library that a large North American city tends to have. And so the IRIS catalog has a lot of materials that are not just Quebec materials. There is a web export service so that you can download records one by one, but we're very conscious that this is not ideal, and we've been wanting to improve this. And so we've been working on what we call the SQTD, which is essentially a cataloging portal, and we hope that this will be much, much more user-friendly for our main client libraries, being the public school and university libraries in Quebec. And this should be available in 2013 and make available a new distribution vehicle for bibliographic and authority records that are cataloged from the Heritage Collection. In addition, for a number of years, we put an emphasis on Quebec government documents, and we make monthly files of the government documents records we've cataloged available for downloading as a file. But unfortunately, only the cataloging and publication records that we create, because the cataloging and publication program in Canada is distributed between BA&Q and Library and Archives Canada, but those records all go together with LAC's MARC record distribution service, and so the cataloging and publication records that we do in my library are distributed on Amicus or WorldCat and anywhere else where the MARC records distribution service is available, but we don't make that service directly. So already you can see, and also our library isn't yet a member of VIAF. So you can see in comparison already that there's a tension between two different views of the national bibliography. On the one hand, as a publication which provides permanent evidence of the territory's publishing output, and which is seen as something that serves researchers of publishing history as well as the general public. And the other view, which is more the LAC view, as the main purpose being a source of authoritative records for library cataloging. So, although BA&Q puts more emphasis on the first side and we serve the second side, at LAC you can see that they're really just serving the second purpose, the source of authoritative records. So here's a quick snapshot of what the IRIS catalog looks like. It's a faceted catalog with little images that show you what kind of material you're dealing with. The first record on this search screen is a ebook, the second one is an audiobook, and the third one is a printed book, and finally a sound recording. And you can limit your searches by the type of document, also by whether it's a remote document or not. And this search I happen to have done is for Michel Tremblay, one of the most well-known Quebec playwrights. And unfortunately, the very first record that's on here is a false hit because the catalog does automatic stemming and has picked up Michel in the feminine by mistake. Now, so then the Bibliography of Quebec also has something that there's no counterpart for at the national level. We have a retrospective bibliography, which covers monographs published or printed in Quebec prior to legal deposit, going back as far as 1821. And this is a database of 60,000 records. And as of 2009, we make it available as a separate online database, as well as having all the records also available in IRIS. So why did we do this second database? Well, we wanted to provide some value-added extra indexes that we weren't populating for all our general cataloging, and so therefore we felt it would be disappointing to offer these indexes in the general catalog. So we have authority-controlled indexes for publishers, printers, cities of publication, and you can do dates, and there's a browsing by broad subject categories as well. And this product is really, I think, a key way of showing that our emphasis is on serving research into the history of Quebec publishing. And so I'll just show you a little bit about the interface. We've got in the center then the possibility of browsing by the broad subjects, and then the different browse searches possible by author, title, series, publisher, printer, publication place, and subjects. When you get down to a specific record, you see that the view of the record here has evolved a bit compared to the actual bibliography, because this is a more modern-looking label display rather than an ISBD display, and you can use any of the access points for which there's multiple hits to jump to another to a set of records that have the same thing. And this happens to be election propaganda, and we're in a provincial election period in Quebec right now, so it's a bit typical. Now, this interface also links to the online catalog for the availability of copies, and if there's any digitized copies available from our in-house digitization, you can link through to them here. Unlike the current bibliography, which doesn't link through to the online catalog and doesn't have any live links to digitized files or for e-resources. But this is a very specialized interface and with a very limited clientele, and you can see that the usage isn't particularly high of it either. And of course, the other thing that's a bit unusual is that we started it in 1821, but publishing in Quebec started in 1764. And that's because early on in the library's history, exhaustive print bibliography for the period 1764 to 1820 had been published in print. And when the design for this, the specs for this project were worked on, there was not seen to be a need to include that. And I think retrospectively, we should probably have gone and done that. Now, as far as I know, the National Library of Canada has never done a retrospective Canadiana project that specifically covers the period prior to 1951. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about cataloging levels. First, the Canadiana policy, and then the BA&Q policy. Canadiana has 4 cataloging levels: full records with all access points, with authority records, Library of Congress and Dewey classification numbers, and either LC English language subjects or RVM French language subjects according to the bilingual record policy. Core records with reduced complement of descriptive access points and reduced subjects. Minimal, again with only abridged Dewey classification and no subjects. And abbreviated, which is extremely, extremely brief, with the title, 1 name access points, not necessarily any authority, no classification, and no subjects. The full records are applied to most current publications, reference and genealogy, core, music sound recordings, federal government documents, minimal to provincial government documents, research technical reports, and rare books of all things. And the abbreviated, now here LAC has a policy where if the material is not cataloged within a period when it's still considered current, it drops down to a lower cataloging level. And so abbreviated cataloging will be applied to things that are more than 3 years old, and also to publications that are considered minor, and to municipal government documents. And they have a priority system which gives priority to the cataloging and publication records, candidates for the Federal Depository Services Program, which is a program for getting federal-level government documents deposited in libraries across the country, and reference materials. Their next priority is completing CIP post-publications and all current publications in special collections and areas of emphasis. And of course, recent publications are cataloged prior to older publications, and they have a policy where digital is cataloged prior to print and other analog publications. So this is an interesting view of the policy and priorities. At BA&Q, we also have 4 cataloging levels, but slightly differently organized. So for full, it's pretty much the same thing, except we never offer English subjects. Core, which in French is called allégé, again just reduces to primary names and titles. With authority records, Dewey class numbers, generally LC class numbers, and subjects. Minimal, very basic names and titles, again with authority records, no LC call numbers, and only genre-form subjects. Our minimal is still compatible with the RDA core record, and our core is compatible with the BibCo standard record. But our 4th level is actually an enriched level rather than an abbreviated level, which is full plus with additional access and detailed description. Now, what do we apply these to? Well, full is applied to the commercial publications, including completion of CIP records, Quebec government documents, which are one of our areas of priority, also self-published and genealogy publications. The core is applied to non-commercial publishers, most municipal government documents, school textbooks, and research technical reports, which we class together and therefore give subject access to at the collection level rather than at the individual level. The minimal is very restricted in its application. It's for minor publications which are not going to appear in the Bibliography du Québec, in the National Bibliography, and these are toy books, puzzle books which are going to be filled in, little books for kids to cut out the paper doll dresses and paste onto the dolls, and kinds of things we assume that libraries aren't buying. And the enriched is actually in 2 flavors. The flavor for the retrospective bibliography, which populates those additional indexes by publisher and printer that I was mentioning, and also for rare books where we do detailed description and signatures and all the detailed collation that you would expect for rare books. So our BA&Q priorities is, of course, our very top priority in the department is the cataloging and publication program. Of course, user requests, because we're connected to a public library, and the current government documents from Quebec. Our next priority is the current year and the previous year's imprints, because these are candidates to be published in the current bibliography, so we put an emphasis on them. Our following priority is all earlier imprints, and within that the priority is to commercial publishers as opposed to non-commercial publishers. We have a policy of cataloging current receipts first, rather than just current publications. So a recently received, rare item will get cataloged in a reasonable period of time. We don't have to wait to work our way all the way back into the 1800s. The year of publication, other than sometimes indicating eligibility for one of these special projects, doesn't have an impact on the cataloging level. In fact, it's the type of material and its content that affects the cataloging level. And online materials have the same priority as other formats. So online, flimsy, self-published material has the same priority as print, self-published, small pamphlets. And online, EPUBs, ebooks that are commercially published have the same priority as print ebooks. We also have a policy of providing equal access for the same content depending on it, basically on its subject rather than on its format. So we will offer the same level of subject analysis and classification to the ebook version of something as to the print version of it as to the microform of it. Now, the interaction of digital resources and legal deposit. Well, in 2004, when Library and Archives Canada was formed, the legal deposit law was modified to include legal deposit of digital resources, so ebooks, and this was a new thing. And in addition, Library and Archives Canada does some web harvesting, of which I don't have enough details to tell you anything much about. But in Quebec, the legal deposit law is slightly different, and so it includes legal deposit of electronic materials only for tangible media and not for ebooks or other online books. So CD-ROMs, yes. Diskettes, yes. Software on diskettes, yes. But we have a program of voluntary deposit, which is growing. We've been trying very hard to encourage publishers to take it up. Now, we started, again, this goes with our existing emphasis on our Quebec government documents, with getting all the Quebec government ministries and sub-ministries and organizations that belong in some way to the government to subscribe to voluntary deposit, and then the para-public sectors, so what we consider health and education sectors. So we have, at this point in our collection of online books, is mainly government documents and similar sorts of documents. And these are often the PDF or HTML versions of documents that are also published in print. And it's growing with the commercial ebooks, and we've had a couple of Quebec publishers who've signed voluntary deposit agreements in the last few months. And this includes access to their back catalogs, everything that they've put on EPUB format. And so this we hope is a growing area. But I've heard some estimates that at this point in Quebec there are some between 2,000 and 3,000 EPUB titles that are published by Quebec publishers and no more. We also have a web harvesting program. Again, we've had to have special agreements with the different sites because we don't have a legal framework that just allows us to do this. So again, a lot on the government sites. And we're doing, specific event-based harvesting, for instance, for political parties for the election campaign that's currently on. And the expectation is that this might lead to maybe some 500 sites per year. Now, for the ebooks, for the EPUBs, we intend to apply the provider-neutral e-monographs cataloging policy, which was defined by the Program for Cooperative Cataloging in the United States, adapted into French, when we start cataloging them more intensively this fall. And so, in fact, our handling of the e-documents for government documents will also be upgraded to that cataloging stat. Now, another question, of course, comes into how do we show these things in the National Bibliography? And so to explain why we even ask ourselves that question, I have to show you the table of contents of the Bibliographie du Québec. And you can see that it starts off on the left column with private sector monographs, and they're grouped by broad subjects by general Dewey classes. Then you get down to non-commercial publishing, and then it starts up again on the next column, government documents by issuing ministry, documents for young people, cartographic documents, sound recordings by different kinds of sound recordings, periodical publications, and then I've circled electronic resources and subdivided into those on tangible media and those online. And finally, posters and prints. So with this kind of organization, the e-resources are in their own section off to the side. And so in one way, this results in highlighting the resources because there's a specific section, you go to it and you see just e-resources. But it also segregates them. And so if someone just goes by subject, they don't see any e-resources and they might think we don't have any. Now, when this decision was made a number of years ago, we didn't have any of these commercial e-books yet. And so the e-resources we had were going to be all government and para-governmental documents or other non-commercial research reports. So we also thought that there was no harm in keeping them aside. But now we're discussing, well, should we abolish that separate section and just mix the electronic resources into the different sections according to where they would fall by subject or by issuing body or type of material? And of course, the advantage with that is that it mainstreams them and indicates that these are normal resources, just as valid as any other resources in those sections. But on the other hand, there's then no focus on them. And so in a sort of a climate where a lot of focus is being put on electronic resources, this might not be as good. Or should we do some sort of combination and, for instance, have subsections, so commercial monographs, e-commercial monographs, government monographs, e-government monographs. But finally, I have to ask myself, is this question still really relevant? Because, should we really instead just be rethinking this traditional format of the bibliography? Should we be doing something more along lines of what Library and Archives Canada does and just do a distribution, a regular distribution of MARC records and consider that the national bibliography, in which case there would be none of this question. And so in conclusion, you can see that in Canada, our two different bibliographic agencies have different emphases, and this is reflected then in how we see our roles a little bit, the different emphasis we play on how the bibliography should be done. We place a different emphasis, I think, on the ultimate role or clientele of the bibliography. So this results in, as I say, different priorities, and we've evolved our products in slightly different ways because of these views. I think both of us have an open question of how linked data will, as a distribution mechanism, what emphasis this will have within national bibliography, and I think neither of us have handled this. But in any case, I firmly believe that universal bibliographic control is essential and a major role for national libraries and national bibliographic agencies because we can offer quality data from an authoritative source. So thank you.